When I met Lauren, she was a woman still piecing herself back together. I didn't know it at the time, not fully. I just knew she was beautiful, kind, and a little guarded in a way that made me want to protect her. She had this quiet sadness in her eyes, a hesitation in her laughter, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to be happy again. I never pried. I never asked too many questions. I figured whatever had hurt her before wasn't my business unless she wanted it to be. And over time, she let me in, bit by bit. Our relationship wasn't built on wild passion or reckless love. It was built on stability, on trust, on the kind of quiet affection that grows stronger with time. I proposed after a year, and she said yes without hesitation. If there were any lingering ghosts in her heart, she never let them show. We built a life together, a home filled with laughter and warmth. I worked hard to give her everything I could. Weekend trips to the mountains, quiet dinners at home, small surprises just to see her smile. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. Now, 8 years into our marriage, we had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, predictable. I woke up at 6 every morning, kissed Lauren on the forehead before heading to work, and spent my days running the small but successful construction business I had built from the ground up. Lauren, who had once worked in marketing, had taken a step back from her career after our son, Noah, was born. She spent her time between part-time consulting work and taking care of him, and I was grateful for everything she did. Life was good. Maybe not perfect, but good. That's why I didn't think much of it when she seemed distracted one evening. We were sitting on the couch after putting Noah to bed, the soft hum of the television filling the quiet space between us. Lauren had her phone in her lap, her fingers resting on the screen as if she had started to type something and then changed her mind. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at her from my spot on the couch. She looked up, startled, as if I had caught her doing something she shouldn't have. But then she smiled, shaking her head. "Yeah, just tired." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? A few days later, we were at the grocery store when she stopped in the middle of the aisle. I had been reaching for a jar of pasta sauce when I noticed her standing frozen, her eyes locked on someone at the end of the aisle. A man. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw him. Derek. Even though I had never met him in person, I knew who he was. The name had surfaced a few times over the years, mostly in passing. Lauren never talked about him much, and I never pushed. But I knew enough. He was the man who had broken her heart all those years ago. The man she had once loved in a way that had left scars. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she turned to me, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's go," she murmured, gripping the handle of the cart a little too tightly. I didn't argue. I just nodded and followed her out of the aisle. But as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that something unseen had cracked open, and I had no idea what it meant. Lauren didn't talk about it after we left the store. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if running into Derek was just another passing moment in a long, ordinary day. But I could tell something had unsettled her. That night, as she got ready for bed, I watched her from my side of the room. She moved slower than usual, as if her mind was somewhere else. She spent an extra few minutes brushing her hair, her gaze distant in the mirror. I wanted to ask. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. Part of me told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. Maybe seeing him had just brought up old memories, and that was natural. But another part of me, the part that noticed the way she hesitated before putting her phone on the nightstand, told me something was off. The next morning, I went about my usual routine. I got up early, made coffee, and headed to work. My company had a new residential project starting on the east side of town, and I needed to be on site early. It was a long day, the kind that left my hands sore and my mind too busy to dwell on anything else. But when I got home that evening, I found Lauren sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with a look I couldn't quite place. She didn't notice me at first, not until I set my keys down on the counter. She jumped slightly and locked her screen. "Hey," she said, a little too quickly. "Hey." I walked over and kissed her on the top of her head, then glanced at Noah, who was playing with his toy trucks on the rug. "How was your day?" "It was fine." She stood up, smoothing her shirt. "Just the usual. I took Noah to the park for a bit." I nodded, letting it go. but the tension in my chest didn't ease. The next few days followed the same pattern. Lauren seemed distracted. She wasn't distant, exactly. She still laughed at my jokes, still kissed me goodnight. But there was something beneath the surface, something she wasn't telling me. One evening, after we put Noah to bed, I finally asked, "You've been quiet lately," I said, watching her as she tidied up the kitchen. She paused, just for a second, before stacking the plates in the dishwasher. "Have I?" "Yeah." I leaned against the counter. "Ever since we saw him at the store." She didn't pretend to misunderstand. She let out a slow breath and closed the dishwasher. "I wasn't expecting to see him," she admitted. "It just caught me off guard." I nodded, waiting for her to say more. "He reached out," she finally said. "Just a text. Just to say it was good to see me." My stomach tightened. "And?" She hesitated. And I replied. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "What did you say?" "Just that it was unexpected, that I hoped he was doing well." She crossed her arms. "That's all." I studied her face, looking for something, some reassurance, some sign that this was nothing to worry about. But the problem was, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, or if I should be worried. "All right," I said after a moment. "I trust you." She nodded, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling long after she had fallen asleep. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just an old flame reaching out, nothing more. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion, something I didn't yet understand. The days passed, and life carried on as usual. At least, that's how it seemed on the surface. Lauren still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still played with Noah in the afternoons, still curled up beside me in the evenings. But there was something else now, something unspoken that lingered between us. I told myself not to overthink it. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that text. She had replied. And while I wanted to believe that was the end of it, a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "What if it isn't?" I had no reason to doubt her. No evidence that anything was wrong beyond a feeling I couldn't shake. But feelings had a way of gnawing at you, of burrowing into the spaces between trust and suspicion, growing until they became impossible to ignore. And then, one night, I saw it. It was late. Lauren had already gone to bed, and I was finishing up some emails for work in the living room. The house was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of crickets outside the window. I stood up to stretch and was about to turn off the lights when I noticed something. Her phone, sitting on the edge of the couch where she had left it earlier. The screen was still on, and there it was. A message, not from an unknown number, not from a coworker or a friend. From him. "Derek, I really needed that talk today. You have no idea how much it meant." My chest tightened. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Talk? She had seen him? I swallowed, trying to push down the sharp edge of unease rising in my throat. My first instinct was to wake her up, to ask her what the hell was going on. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, staring at the screen, until it dimmed and the message disappeared. I knew I had a choice. I could pretend I hadn't seen it, could bury the uneasy feeling and go back to believing everything was fine. Or I could ask her, confront her, risk hearing something I didn't want to hear. I took a deep breath and made my way to the bedroom. Lauren was asleep, her breathing soft and steady. For a long time, I just stood there, watching her, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. Finally, I climbed into bed, my back turned to her. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, over breakfast, I tried to act normal. I sipped my coffee, listened to Noah talk about the new toy truck he wanted, and nodded along as Lauren told me she had plans to run errands that afternoon. But the whole time, my mind kept circling back to that message. I waited until Noah was distracted with his cereal before I spoke. "Did you see him?" I asked, my voice careful, measured. Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Derek, did you see him?" For a second, she didn't answer. Then she set her coffee down and folded her hands together. "Yes," she said finally. "I ran into him at the coffee shop yesterday. We talked for a few minutes." A sharp, uneasy feeling settled in my gut. "You didn't mention that." She exhaled, brushing her fingers through her hair. I didn't think it was important. It was just a conversation, nothing more. I nodded slowly, choosing my next words carefully. He texted you last night. Her eyes widened just slightly before she masked it with a neutral expression. You looked at my phone? It was on the couch. The screen lit up. I saw his name. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. What did he mean when he said he needed that talk? Lauren hesitated. He's going through a tough time. A breakup. He just needed someone to talk to. Something inside me twisted. And that someone had to be you? She flinched. Come on, it's not like that. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. Lauren, you didn't even tell me you saw him. And now he's texting you, saying things like that? She looked down, shaking her head. I didn't think it was a big deal. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something told me this wasn't over. And that scared the hell out of me. The days following that conversation felt different. Nothing had exploded. There had been no fights, no accusations thrown. Just a quiet tension that settled into the corners of our home like dust, building up where it couldn't be easily brushed away. Lauren assured me there was nothing to worry about. She said Derek was just an old friend going through a hard time. Someone she once knew, nothing more. And maybe that was true. But the problem with trust is that once a crack appears, even a small one, it has a way of spreading. I started paying attention to little things I had never noticed before. The way she kept her phone close now, setting it face down on the counter instead of leaving it out in the open. The way she sometimes hesitated before answering my questions, as if choosing her words carefully. And then, there were the times she wasn't home when I expected her to be. It started subtly. An extra 30 minutes at the grocery store. A last-minute errand that took longer than it should have. A consulting meeting she hadn't mentioned before. I told myself I was being paranoid. Until one evening, when I came home earlier than usual. Noah was at my parents' house for the night. I had finished work earlier than expected and picked up takeout, planning to surprise Lauren. But when I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I checked the kitchen. Empty. The living room. Empty. Her car was still in the driveway, but she wasn't here. I frowned, setting the food down on the counter before heading to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw her phone sitting on the nightstand. And it was unlocked. Lauren rarely left her phone unattended anymore. She always carried it with her, even if she was just stepping into another room. But now, it was just sitting there, screen glowing softly in the dim light. And there was a message thread open. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew that whatever I was about to do crossed a line. But I also knew I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding as I scanned the messages. Derek, today felt just like old times. Derek, I forgot how easy it is to talk to you. I've missed this. And then, Lauren, I know. Me too. The words blurred for a second as I exhaled, gripping the edge of the nightstand. I scrolled up. There were more messages. Casual at first, talk about work, life, harmless reminiscing. But then they shifted. The conversation stretched longer, the tone softer, more familiar. She hadn't told me everything. She had lied. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't just an old friend reconnecting. This was something else. I stood there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to figure out what to do next. Confront her? Pretend I hadn't seen it? Give her the chance to come clean? I didn't know. But what I did know was that the life we had built, the life I thought was solid, was starting to crack beneath me. And I wasn't sure if it could be put back together. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glow of her phone screen as the words burned into my mind. I know. Me too. The words weren't damning on their own. They weren't an outright confession. But they weren't innocent either. They weren't the words of a woman who had shut the door on her past. They weren't the words of a wife who had no lingering feelings for the man she once loved. I heard the front door open. Lauren was home. I set the phone down exactly as I had found it and stood up. My hands felt too tight, clenched at my sides, and my heartbeat pounded against my ribs as I walked back into the hallway. She was slipping off her shoes when she saw me standing there. "Hey," she said, brushing a hand through her hair. "I thought you had a late meeting?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. finished early, picked up dinner. Her eyes flickered toward the counter, where the takeout bags sat untouched. Oh, that was sweet of you. She hesitated. I was just out running errands. I let the words sit between us for a second before nodding. Yeah. She nodded quickly, brushing past me. Yeah, just groceries and a quick stop at the mall. It was the first real lie. I knew it, and I knew she knew it. She had been somewhere else. She had been with him. I wanted to call her out right then and there, to throw the words at her, demand the truth. But I didn't, because I wasn't ready to hear what she would say. Instead, I sat down at the dining table, unpacking the food, acting as if nothing had changed. And maybe for her, nothing had. But for me, everything had. Over the next few days, I watched her carefully. She still kissed me in the mornings, still laughed at Noah's silly jokes, still slipped into bed beside me at night, as if nothing had shifted. But there was a distance now, a gap between us that hadn't been there before. I stopped touching her as often, stopped reaching for her in the quiet moments, afraid of what I might feel if I did. And I started paying attention to the things I had once ignored. She checked her phone more often now, always careful to keep it out of my sight. She started dressing differently. Nothing drastic, just small changes, a little more effort, a little more attention to the way she looked before leaving the house. And sometimes, when I spoke to her, it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. The worst part was, I knew she wasn't the type of woman to throw everything away over nothing. Lauren wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. If she was entertaining the idea of Derek, if she was allowing herself to miss him, it meant something inside her had already made the choice to look back. And that scared me more than anything. One night, after Noah had gone to sleep, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. She was sitting on the couch, curled up with her legs tucked beneath her, scrolling through her phone. I stood by the kitchen, watching her, waiting. I had spent the entire day thinking about what I would say, how I would approach it. But when I finally spoke, the words came out quieter than I had expected. Are you happy? She looked up, startled. What? I stepped closer, watching her carefully. Are you happy, Lauren? With us? She hesitated. It was barely a second, but it was there. And that hesitation did something to me. You're acting different, I continued. You're distant. And I don't want to sit here pretending like I don't see it. She exhaled, setting her phone down. Ethan, come on. No. I shook my head. Don't dismiss this. She bit her lip, looking away for a moment before meeting my gaze. I don't know. The words hit me harder than they should have. You don't know? She sighed. I love you. I love our life. But sometimes I wonder if she stopped herself, shaking her head. If you what? I pressed. She swallowed, looking down at her hands. If I made the right choice. The air between us went still. I had been preparing myself for a lot of things. But not that. Not her questioning us. I took a step back, as if the space would keep the words from sinking in. What does that mean, Lauren? My voice was quieter now. Are you telling me you have regrets? She didn't answer right away. And when she finally did, it wasn't with a yes or no. I don't know what I'm telling you, she whispered. And suddenly, I knew. She was slipping. I could feel it happening in real time. The unraveling of something I had once thought was unbreakable. And the worst part? I had no idea how to stop it. I spent the next few days moving through life like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground beneath him to give way. I kept going to work, kept playing with Noah, kept pretending that things at home weren't shifting beneath my feet. But they were. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. Lauren had answered my question with uncertainty, and that alone was enough to tell me what I already feared. She was slipping away. Not all at once, not in an obvious way, but slowly, piece by piece, moment by moment. The worst part was, I didn't know if she even realized it. Maybe she thought she was just reminiscing, just talking, just catching up with an old part of her life she had once buried. But I knew better. I knew how these things started, and I knew how they ended. I told myself I wouldn't check her phone again, that I wouldn't let my thoughts spiral into suspicion and doubt. But doubt doesn't need permission. It creeps in whether you want it to or not. And on a Thursday night, when she left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter, I made the decision before I could stop myself. I picked it up, swiped, unlocked, and this time, I didn't have to scroll far. The messages between her and Derek weren't long, but they were enough. Enough to confirm that whatever had started as an innocent conversation had turned into something else. Derek, I still think about you, you know? Lauren, you shouldn't. Derek, and yet, I do. Lauren. She hadn't shut him down. She hadn't told him to stop. She hadn't even said she was happy where she was. She had paused. I felt something crack deep inside me. I wanted to slam the phone down, throw it across the room, wake her up and demand to know what the hell she was thinking. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the words, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. This wasn't just harmless nostalgia. This wasn't just an old friend reaching out. This was something neither of them had put a stop to. I placed the phone back exactly as I had found it and walked out of the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My hands clenched at my sides, and I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my emotions from boiling over. Lauren had made a choice. Maybe she hadn't crossed the line completely yet, but she was standing at the edge. And she wasn't turning away. She was looking back. And suddenly, I realized something. She wasn't just questioning her past. She was rewriting it. All these years, I had believed I had saved her from that heartbreak, from that failed relationship. I had thought I was the one who had given her something stable, something real. But what if, in her mind, I hadn't been the love story? What if I had been the rebound, the safe choice, the steady ground she ran to when her world had fallen apart? I felt sick. For years, I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my commitment. And now, she was standing at a crossroads, questioning if she had made the right choice. The answer should have been easy, but it wasn't, because some part of her, whether she admitted it or not, still wanted him. I clenched my jaw and looked up at the sky, breathing through the sharp pain in my chest. I had spent years believing we were unshakable, but maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I had never truly had her in the first place. I always thought if something like this ever happened, if Lauren ever betrayed me, I'd know right away, that I'd feel it, some instinct deep in my gut, and confront it head-on. But the truth is, you don't always see betrayal the moment it happens. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, slipping into your life like a shadow, unnoticed until it's too late. That night, I learned that lesson the hard way. She didn't come home when she said she would. She had told me she was meeting a friend for dinner. A friend, no name, no details, just a vague excuse. I told myself I wouldn't assume the worst. I wouldn't let my thoughts run wild. But when 9 o'clock passed, then 10, then 11, I knew. I sat in the darkened living room, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I could have called. I could have texted. But I didn't. Instead, I waited. And at 11:42 p.m., I heard the front door open. She stepped inside quietly, like she was hoping not to wake me. But when she saw me sitting there, waiting, her breath hitched. She knew. She didn't speak right away. And that silence was all the confirmation I needed. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low, measured. She swallowed. "I told you. Dinner." I nodded slowly, my jaw tightening. "With who?" A pause. A hesitation. And then, softly, too softly, she answered. "Derek." I felt something inside me snap. I exhaled slowly, my hands flexing against my thighs as I leaned forward. "Lauren," I said, my voice eerily calm, "did you sleep with him?" She flinched. That second of hesitation before she answered, before she shook her head too quickly, told me everything. "No," she whispered. "I didn't." I stared at her, at the way her hands trembled slightly, at the guilt in her eyes. She might not have slept with him, but she had done something. Something she couldn't take back. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be something I didn't want to hear. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I saw her debating whether to lie or tell the truth. And then, she broke. "I kissed him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. She cut herself off, shaking her head. "It just happened." I closed my eyes for a brief second, exhaling slowly. A kiss. I should have been relieved it wasn't more. But I wasn't. Because it wasn't just a kiss. It was a choice. A choice to betray me. To betray us. You did mean to, I said quietly. You don't just accidentally kiss someone, Lauren. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Nothing but the cold weight of realization settling in my chest. She had been slipping away from me for weeks. And now, she had finally crossed the line. I'm so sorry, she whispered. It was a mistake. I let out a humorless laugh, running a hand through my hair. A mistake, I repeated. That's all this is to you? She reached for me then, as if to touch me, to offer some kind of comfort. But I stepped back, and that single movement, the space I put between us, made something flicker in her eyes. Fear. Because she realized, maybe for the first time, that she wasn't in control of this anymore. I was. I need time, I said, my voice empty, to think. She nodded frantically, stepping forward again. Of course, Ethan. We can work through this. We can fix this. But I wasn't sure we could. Because the worst part wasn't the kiss. The worst part was knowing she had wanted it. And no matter how much she apologized, I couldn't forget that. I wasn't sure I ever would. I spent the night in the guest room. Not because I wanted to punish Lauren, but because I couldn't bring myself to lie beside her, pretending that things hadn't changed. Sleep never came. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything that had led to this moment. The hesitation in her voice. The secrecy. The way she had looked at me, as if she wasn't sure if she loved me enough anymore. By morning, I had my answer. I couldn't stay. Not in this house. Not in this marriage. Not with the knowledge that I had spent years giving everything to a woman who, when faced with a choice, had let herself drift back to the past. I got out of bed before the sun rose, packed a bag with only what I needed, and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavier than it should have. But just as I reached the front door, I heard her voice. Ethan. I turned. Lauren stood at the top of the stairs, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She looked different somehow. Smaller. Defeated. You're leaving, she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. I have to. She took a breath, like she was about to argue. But then she let it out in a slow exhale. I never wanted to hurt you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Yeah? You sure about that? She flinched, but I didn't regret saying it. Because even now, even after everything, I still wasn't sure she fully understood what she had done. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could turn it, she spoke again. Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the metal. Lauren, I don't want any more excuses. It's not an excuse. She swallowed hard. It's the truth. And you need to know before you walk out that door. I turned, watching as she gripped the railing, as if steadying herself. Then, she said the one thing I never expected. Noah isn't yours. The air left my lungs. I stared at her, the words crashing into me like a freight train, my mind scrambling to process what she had just said. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not possible. She closed her eyes. I was pregnant before we got married. I found out right after Derek left, and I was scared. I thought I'd lost everything. Then you came along, and you were safe, and you lied to me. My voice was barely my own. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Why are you telling me this now? My voice was sharp, almost unrecognizable. Because I can't keep lying to you, she whispered. Not anymore. Not after everything. You deserve to know the truth. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me for years. Noah, my son. Except, he wasn't. The boy I had raised, the boy I had held as he took his first steps, the boy who looked up at me like I was his whole world. He wasn't mine. And suddenly, the betrayal I had felt over her affair with Derek was nothing compared to the weight of this. For 8 years, I had been living a lie. I backed up a step, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own home. I don't even know who you are. Ethan. I shook my head. No, don't. My voice cracked. You don't get to ask me to stay. Not after this. She reached for me, but I stepped back. And this time, when I turned toward the door, I didn't hesitate. I walked out. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how I would process the fact that my entire marriage had been built on a lie. But I did know one thing. This time, I wasn't looking back. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling so you never miss an update on more jaw-dropping real-life stories. Catch you in the next video.